Mythos gets requested in the Jockle suggestions that I make a video about Faustian Judaism. What does that mean? Talked about it before. Faustian, we can define it in opposition to the conservative, the familiar, the one who wants to return to nostalgia, to return to what is known. The Faustian wants to go outside. The Faustian wants newness. The Faustian wants the exotic and is xenophilic. The Faustian wants to go to new lands. So typically we think of the Faustian as the Russian who goes to Siberia, or the Spaniard who goes to the Americas. We think about the Dutch in South Africa or Indonesia. Think about colonialism. We think about imperialism. But the original tale of Dr. Faustus is not actually of a man who goes on a journey through space. He's not sailing around the world, but he's looking for knowledge. He's looking into alchemical knowledge, which in the medieval era was significantly tied to the Kabbalah, or the Kabbalah, which is an esoteric Jewish practice. So the Faustian spirit, I think we understand it's first and foremost primarily a mental, psychological, philosophical, abstract orientation rather than a relation to the land. I think the concept of blood and soil is certainly something that is not Faustian, right? And often people want to make a union of opposites here and combine things together, as sometimes they should be, masculine and feminine. We can say maybe the Faustian is the masculine, and the, nationalist spirit, or the conservative spirit, the one who wants to stay home, the one who wants a homeland, that is a feminine spirit in a way. Whether people like to admit that or not, if that hurts your sense of gender or whatever. But for the Jews, clearly they have adherence in Orthodox Judaism to these commandments, and there's like 619 of them, things that you have to do, technicalities about how you pray and you wash your hands and the way you wear your clothes and the way you cut your hair, and everything's very particular. So in that sense, the strictures of Judaism are remarkably conservative in a way, that the Jews have created a psychological ecology that is their temple. So they don't have a physical temple anymore. Now they have a rabbinical temple. It is the there's this term, a tabernacle, which is the old English term, sometimes the Ark of the Covenant. It's basically a box, and the Jews carry around this box. They're this diaspora people, a lost people. They're wandering through the wilderness. This is kind of their origin, and this is how they continue to be to this day, where they don't really have a homeland. Now, Israel has kind of thrown a wrench in there. But ignoring Israel, Israel has about half the world's Jewish population, according to certain statistics. I actually doubt that. I think there are many more Jews in the world than are often. Depends on how you define Judaism. People who are half Jewish, people who are quarter Jewish. But when we're talking about this tabernacle, the concept of the tabernacle, these rituals serve as a tabernacle. They serve as a reminder of God, of the familiar, of their identity. It's something they can carry around with them. They can be in the tropics, they can be in the Arctic, they can be in the Ukraine, they can be in Israel, they can be in China. Doesn't matter where a Jew is. And this is something, of course, that Jews then give to Christianity and Islam, the idea that you can pray to God wherever. You don't need a specific, pagans have specific sacred groves. Pagans have specific architectural structures, physical temples. Paganism, in a sense, is more feminine, right? Paganism is more tied to the land. Paganism is more tied to nature and forms and physicality. And Judaism sort of rejects that and rejects the physical and rejects the architectural and rejects the artistic. It's an iconoclastic religion. It says you have to destroy all the idols, anything that is a graven image. So in some ways, Judaism takes that conservative mentality, the idolatry of the pagans for things like physical beauty, the beauty of a woman, the beauty of a temple, the beauty of a forest. The Jews reject that in favor of what they fetishize rather than physical objects. They fetishize the abstraction of mitzvot or the commandments or these abstract prayers, their language, very linguistically oriented, these abstractions. So Judaism, in a sense, frees itself from the natural world and enters into this unnatural world or supernatural world of God, of divinity, of spirituality. And that allows Jews to explore ideas in a way that other philosophical perspectives like paganism can't really do. Paganism is tied to the land. Paganism is tied to the soil. Paganism is tied to instinctual notions of beauty. Like, we don't, when you see a beautiful woman, you don't begin to abstract her. You don't begin to judge her according to 619 different characteristics. Maybe implicitly you do, maybe on an unconscious or subconscious level you do. But there's something compulsive about it. When you see a beautiful woman, you don't analyze her in order to see the beauty. You don't need to. It's instantaneous. It's instinctual. It's not something you choose. It's something that happens to you. You are the passive recipient of the beauty. You're not actively deciding what is beautiful and what is not beautiful. So in a sense, the pagan worldview is a more passive worldview, and therefore it's more rooted in the instinct. It's rooted in what feels natural, what is instinctual, what comes to us ancestrally. And so paganism is a way of viewing the world, that the world is what it is, and you don't question it, you don't turn it over in your head, you don't invert it, you don't abstract it, you don't analyze it. It simply is what it is. You're in the moment, you're playing sports, you're making love, you're fighting war, you're just experiencing life. You're present in the moment. Judaism allows one to get out of nature, to get out of the moment. It allows for a critical mode of thought, which separates oneself from the immediacy of nature, from the immediacy of our instincts and our ancestors. The most basic instinct at all is the sexual instinct. And Judaism attacks that first and foremost. You see this in Orthodox Judaism, where married couples cut a hole through a sheet. They can't even be naked, man and woman, alone by themselves. That is the extent of, not to say nothing of circumcision, infant circumcision, and the process of the rabbinical procedure that follows the circumcision. It's all very anti-sexual. It's all very fearful of sexuality and critical of sexuality, and looks at and puts distance between man and his sexuality, and makes man question his sexuality in a way that paganism simply accepts it. It simply is. It's not something to be analyzed. It's the difference, I suppose, between the aesthetic mode of perception, in which you simply recognize beauty and you seek beauty and you pursue beauty and you try to adhere yourself to standards which are implicit, which are known, which are obvious. There's that one form. And then the other form, which is beauty is sort of up in the air, beauty is abstracted, beauty is something that we can use pill pull to discover, beauty is something to be debated, beauty is something which is not physical, beauty is maybe an idea. And so there are these two different perspectives. One of them, I think, when you look at the Faustian impulse historically, in the case of pagan and aesthetic worldview. It manifests itself physically through physical space. And it also manifests itself in terms of solving physical problems, solving problems of engineering, of chemistry, of physics, of building bridges, of building weapons and contraptions, and solving physical problems related to war and other civilizational problems. How do we build a skyscraper? So that is the sort of technical consequence, or we could refer to Archimedes, for example, that a man like Archimedes is the product of a culture that's fixated on aesthetics and comes from a pagan perspective, whereas Judaism does have a diasporatic element. That is, Judaism wants to be everywhere all at once. Of course, you've got the Zionists, you've got the Israelis, but I'm very suspicious that this 70-year Zionist project is going to continue as long as Judaism has been a diaspora people. I mean, you look at the Bible, and throughout the Bible, the Jews are said to have been all over the place. Even when, in the reign of King David, there were still Jews all over the place. There was never a point in Jewish history from the time of Abraham where there were not Jews in many different countries, even when they did have their own nation state or their own empire. To me, it seems that the diaspora nature of Jews is much more native to them than this nation state model, which is rather ephemeral, and you see it at some points in their history, and then at other points it comes back. But I don't think that's the essential character of the perspective. So there is a physical element, a desire to be everywhere at all times, and to explore new places. But more than that, it's also a psychological thing of questioning, redefining things, and rather than just accepting things for how they are, in an aesthetical sense, you're trying to take basic axioms and then develop them from there. So again, to retrace our steps here, if your starting point is aesthetics, then you're starting with things like life is good and beautiful. The human form is good, and the human body is beautiful. It's attractive, it's lovely, it's powerful, it's inspiring. And so that's your starting point of how do we promote the health of the human body? How do we promote victory in war? How do we promote architecture that's reflective of this? How do we promote the creation of war machines? So you've got all of those mentalities and consequences, whereas when you look at Judaism rejects the beauty of the body for the most part. I guess you could say the Song of Solomon in some ways contradicts that. And I would say part of that is from a class analysis, because I think really what we're talking about is the difference between the warrior mentality and a priestly mentality, then can develop into a mercantile mentality. But ultimately, what Nietzsche called the life-rejecting instinct, that is something that we see in this rejection of the physical body and the rejection of sexuality and the rejection of war. Following the Maccabees, there was a huge period of time where the Jews basically rejected the concept of warfare almost entirely. It wasn't that they were pacifistic. It wasn't that they rejected violence or sadism, but that they rejected the concept of war, that war and war making and creating war machines and war bands and phalanxes and military units, that was something that they rejected. They said, there's no way we can win this way. We've been defeated by the Greeks. We've been defeated by the Romans. We've been humiliated. It's time to go to a different plane. It's time to go to a different generation of warfare, you could say. And so they kind of put that to the side. And so the incentive structures that are there are completely different. They're completely shifted. And they're just taking axioms like, how do we worship God? Well, what is God? Well, God's nothingness. He's Ein Sof. He's abstraction. He's these commandments. Well, what justifies the commandments? Well, just like nominalistically, God has issued these commandments. I think Ben Shapiro has said before on the Joe Rogan show, he said something like, there are some people who try to justify the kosher laws as, shellfish has diseases or pigs have diseases. But as Jews, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't try to justify the laws naturalistically. We shouldn't try to give them some kind of utilitarian justification. That is antithetical to the ethos of Judaism, which says these are the nominalist laws of God. He's just given them down to us. We just have to accept them uncritically, no matter how silly they are. We have to give them the utmost respect and spirituality as a means of humiliating ourselves, or to show humility before God. And that, I think, is accurate in terms of the traditional perspective of Orthodox Judaism, that it says we're going to start with a base axiomatic principle and not question it at all, and then take it to its logical conclusion. And I think that's what you see in Ayn Rand, and I think that's what you see in Karl Marx, and I think that's what you see in a lot of these so-called secular Jews or atheist Jews who are not obviously Orthodox, but they're taking that same mentality of I'm going to arbitrarily choose capitalism, I'm going to choose communism, I'm going to choose atheism, I'm going to choose, Anton LaVey chooses hedonism and Satanism. Of course, Jacob Frank, the Sabbateans and various different sects of Judaism, they might start from different principles, but they treat those principles in the same way, not as an organic whole, not as part of a natural ecology, not as part of a utilitarian instinctual justification, not on a Heideggerian, thing in itself. You just appreciate the beauty of the object, you appreciate the thing just for what it is. It is God coming from completely outside the world, completely detached from the world, without a body, having nothing to do with the world, as opposed to the pagan gods who always have physical bodies, and who have sex with human beings. This God is completely separate from nature, and in fact against nature, and hates nature in a way. And so you're just sort of taking this alien, it is a Faustian process, you're taking some alien idea, whether it's Jehovah or Yahweh or communism or capitalism or hedonism or whatever. You're just taking something from completely outside the world without justification. It kind of crash lands like an asteroid, and then you take it and then you pursue it fully and thoroughly. And of course, in that process, people disagree on which way to go, and so you get all these little splintering sects. You could say egalitarianism, you could talk about many intellectual pursuits, but that is a difference, whereas the pagan is kind of always checking himself against his instincts. He's always listening to the call of the ancestors and saying, what would my ancestors think? What do the instincts tell me? How does my gut feel? Judaism is all about rejecting the gut feeling. The gut feeling is evil. The gut feeling is naturalistic. The gut feeling is animalistic. It's lowly. And so you reject your gut, you reject your instincts, you reject the ancestors in a lot of ways. And in that way, it's a patricidal, even though, the cult of the patriarchs are pretty big in Judaism. There is a psychological element of patricide there, which I link with the Indo-European myth of Zeus killing Kronos and Odin killing the giants. And you could even say the way that Christ rebels against the Old Testament or rebels against the Pharisees, the revolution of patricide is very important. So, even that is contained there, where for Jews, nature in a way is the father to be rebelled against, the old father, the god of nature. Or you could even say like Tiamat, a feminine nature, mother nature, rebelled against with Marduk. Of course, that's the Babylonian version. The Babylonians were Semites. They spoke a Semitic language. Jews came after them, and they took that myth of Marduk slaying Tiamat and they made it into Yahweh subjugating nature. And so this is how I think you can get things like, just very out there things. And that's what I mean when I say Judaism is Faustian, is that when it's unrooted from the Orthodox tradition, which is very strict and very conservative in a lot of ways, but when you take it out of that and you orient Judaism around consent theory, you orient Judaism around Marxism. And when I say Judaism, I don't mean belief in Yahweh, I don't mean belief in the Bible, I mean this process by which you take an abstract idea, you glom yourself onto it, you worship it completely independent of all your instincts and all your gut feelings. And you simply you take it to its logical conclusion. And so that can result in a lot of weird, wacky, out there results, which I think is what maybe makes Jews such good comedians, is they're able to think outside the box. They're able to take things that are kind of integrated, For a pagan mentality, contradictions are not a big problem. If, let's say, that there are many contradictions in society. Like the farmer, maybe he treats his cows well, and then at the end of the season, he kills his cows and eats them. That for the farmer is part of the natural cycle of life. But for the Jew will take something like an abstract, the concept of, well, if you take care of your cow, you love it, but then if you kill your cow, you hate it. And so that's a big contradiction. I'm not really setting up the joke very well, but the point is that by teasing out these contradictions, by hyper focusing on them, and by contrasting them viciously against one another, I think this is how you get a lot of good comedy, because comedy is about this jarring effect of contradictions, which normally are things that we've integrated, in the dissonance of the chaos of the organic jungle of culture. The Jewish perspective is able to take the extremes or logical conclusions of two things that might normally be somewhat in harmony, or just part of everyday life, and he's able to take those and smash them together in a black and white dichotomy and say, look at how jarring this is, and that becomes funny. So I mean, there's more examples I guess we could show, but I guess this is what I sort of mean by Faustian Judaism. It's this going outside of the mind, going outside of tradition, going outside of the natural, going outside of the instincts, going outside of nature, seeking something outside of nature. In a sense, I look at Buddhism and Judaism both as a kind of minoritarian historical situation where you've got people who are sort of surrounded by people unlike themselves. They feel like, I don't get along with these people at all. I feel like the school shooter in the middle of the class. I feel like the kid who, is smart, surrounded by a bunch of dummies. I feel alienated. I feel like the adult surrounded by kids. I feel like I don't have anyone to talk to, the goth kid in the class, the emo kid in the class. And this mentality, I think, produces these kinds of desires, focusing on nothingness, which is common between Judaism and Buddhism in a way. There are some common links there. And just going outside. In a sense, Buddhism doesn't necessarily hate nature, in the same sense that I would say Judaism has an antithetical view toward nature and the natural world and the visual world. Buddhism isn't so much necessarily about circumcising yourself and castrating yourself and, destroying your sexuality in that way, but Buddhism kind of seeks this completely nil, nothing. I'm not positively desiring sex, but I'm also not desiring to hate my sexuality, because the Buddhist views the hatred of sexuality as sort of an addiction in itself. Judaism doesn't quite recognize that or buy into that, and so it remains fanatical. Judaism is about the will. Buddhism actually rejects the will, but Judaism says, no, the will is good, but we need to align our will with God, and God can be whatever you want him to be at the moment. It can be Yahweh, it can be the 619 commandments, it can be capitalism, communism, hedonism, Satanism, progressivism, whateverism, classical liberalism in the case of Ben Shapiro, maybe Zionism. It can be whatever you want. So I don't know. Is that enough? Is that enough on the video? We'll see. I would love to speak with a Jewish person about their perspective. I don't know. No Jewish people have come up to me and, well, I can't. I've known converts of Jews who have wanted to talk to me, but I don't really want to talk to a convert. That's the other thing about Judaism. Judaism is very suspicious of converts, and I think that's something that I don't know. There's something that I can respect about that. If you don't recognize that element of it, then you're maybe missing some of the point of it. But yeah, that's about it. That's about all. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.